Why do certain truths seem to vanish at the very moment we try to observe them directly? This question points to a subtle but persistent paradox in human cognition in most areas of life. We assume that direct attention produces clarity. If something is unclear, the solution appears obvious. Look more closely, analyze more carefully, focus more intensely. This assumption works well when dealing with external objects, technical problems, or measurable systems. However, when this same strategy is applied to inner experience, awareness, identity, meaning, or presence, it often backfires. Intense self-observation frequently increases confusion rather than resolving it. People report anxiety when trying to watch awareness itself, frustration when attempting to locate a stable sense of self, or mental exhaustion when forcing insight through introspection. These failures are not accidental. They indicate a structural limitation in how attention operates. The central thesis of this lecture is that some realities cannot be accessed through direct cognitive fixation. They are not hidden, nor mysterious in a romantic sense. They are revealed only indirectly, through alignment rather than inspection. This is not metaphorical mysticism. It is an epistemological and psychological problem, examined with unusual rigor by Ibn Arabi, whose work offers a systematic explanation for why certain truths resist direct observation. Modern psychological culture strongly reinforces the idea that clarity comes from control. People are encouraged to monitor their thoughts, analyze their emotions, define their identity, and constantly work on themselves. This produces a cognitive condition marked by hyper self-monitoring, relentless introspection, and persistent pressure to fully understand oneself. From a psychological perspective, this corresponds to excessive metacognitive monitoring and heightened self-referential processing. Neuroscientifically, it is associated with increased activity in the default mode network, a set of brain regions involved in self-representation, narrative identity, and internal evaluation. While the DMN is essential for reflection and planning, its overactivation is strongly linked to rumination, anxiety, and depressive thinking. In practical terms, this manifests as anxiety during meditation, identity confusion during self-analysis, and burnout from constant self-optimization. A crucial insight from cognitive science helps explain why direct attention alters the system being observed, just as measurement affects outcomes in physics. Observation in cognition changes the mental state it targets. The modern mind assumes that more attention equals more truth. Ibn Arabi challenges this assumption directly, showing that some aspects of consciousness become unstable under scrutiny and that a different mode of knowing is required. Ibn Arabi is often misquoted as a poetic mystic concerned primarily with spiritual emotion. In reality, he was a systematic metaphysician deeply interested in how knowledge itself functions. His central concern was not belief, but epistemology, the conditions under which knowing is possible. A key distinction in his thought lies between two modes of knowledge. The first is knowledge by conceptual grasp, object-based, analytical, and representational. The second is knowledge by presence, or you are, where something is known not as an object but as an immediately operative reality. Ibn Arabi argues that certain truths are self-revealing only when they are not objectified. When he says that something cannot be looked at directly, he does not mean that it is secret, hidden, or concealed. He means that it is structurally incompatible with object-based attention. Attempting to turn it into an object destroys the conditions under which it can appear. This aligns closely with modern distinctions between tacit and explicit knowledge, articulated by thinkers like Michael Polanyi. Some mental states, skills, and forms of understanding collapse when made fully explicit. Ibn Arabi develops this insight into a comprehensive framework, which he unfolds through several interconnected principles. The first core principle is deceptively simple. When awareness attempts to observe itself as an object, distortion occurs. Observation introduces duality. Awareness splits into an observer and an observer, even though awareness itself is not divisible in that way. Cognitively, this produces self-referential loops and recursive attention. The mind starts monitoring its own monitoring, which amplifies default mode network activity and often leads to rumination instead of clarity. The result is mental noise. Everyday experience offers clear examples. Trying to fall asleep by monitoring sleep usually keeps you awake. Trying to feel authentic by constantly checking authenticity produces self-consciousness rather than genuineness. In each case, the act of observation interferes with the process itself. Ibn Arabi's insight is that precise truth is not hidden, it is disrupted by excessive self-positioning. When awareness adopts a stance of control toward itself, it creates the very obstacle it is trying to overcome. The problem, then, is not ignorance or lack of effort, it is the assumption that control is the correct relationship to. Knowing the second principle naturally follows that some realities disclose themselves only indirectly. Ibn Arabi emphasizes that the real is known by correspondence, not confrontation. Attempting to seize it directly produces contraction rather than understanding. Helpful analogy comes from perception. Peripheral vision often detects motion more effectively than central fixation. Similarly, many cognitive insights emerge when attention relaxes rather than tightens. Neuroscience research supports this. Insight states are associated with reduced prefrontal control and increased integrative processing across brain networks. This explains why creative solutions often appear during walks, showers, or moments of rest, rather than during intense analytical effort. Emotional clarity also tends to arise after letting go of excessive analysis, not during it. It is important to clarify a common misunderstanding. Indirect knowledge is not passivity, laziness, or anti-intellectualism. It is a different mode of cognition. Direct grasping narrows perception and imposes structure prematurely. Indirect openness allows information to integrate across multiple levels. For Ibn Arabi, this is not a mystical preference, but a structural necessity. Some truths emerge only when the demand to capture them is withdrawn. The third principle is the most counterintuitive. The veil is not something external. It is the method of inquiry itself. Object-based cognition assumes separateness. It presumes a subject here and an object there, but some truths are non-separable by nature. Psychologically, effortful attention produces attentional narrowing. Attention bias filters experience according to expectations and goals, which can be useful in problem-solving but limiting in existential inquiry. Searching for calm creates tension. Searching For meaning blocks meaning. Ibn Arabi's logic is exact when the mode of knowing contradicts the structure of the known. Blindness results. The failure is methodological, not metaphysical. Crucially, the solution is not trying less in a vague sense. It is standing differently in relation to knowing. The question shifts from, how do I grasp this, to what stance allows this to appear without distortion at this point. A common objection arises if something cannot be looked at directly. Does that make it vague or imaginary? Ibn Arabi's answer is no, and philosophy supports him. Many forms of legitimate knowledge are indirect. You know balance not by analyzing it conceptually, but by enacting it. You know trust not by defining it, but by participating in it. You know presence not by observing it, but by not leaving it. Cognitive science reinforces this distinction through implicit learning systems and the difference between procedural and declarative knowledge. Some capacities are degraded when forced into explicit representation. Ibn Arabi's contribution is to formalize this insight. Metaphysically, indirect knowing is not a failure of rigor, it is structurally necessary. When the object of knowledge is pre-objectual, resists objectification, is not unreal, it precedes the categories that objectification requires, translated into modern terms. Ibn Arabi's framework suggests practical adjustments, rather than mystical techniques. The first is reducing excessive self-monitoring. Psychological research consistently shows that emotional regulation improves when emotions are allowed rather than scrutinized. Mindfulness practices are effective not when attention is controlling, but when it is open and non-intrusive. The same applies to insight and decision making. Forcing conclusions increases cognitive strain, while allowing integration improves clarity at a behavioral level. This can mean designing environments that reduce cognitive overload, allowing periods of unfocused attention, and recognizing when analysis has become counterproductive. Neuroscientifically, this corresponds to a balanced interaction between executive control networks and the default mode network, neither domination nor suppression, but coordination. The practical takeaway is clear. The goal is alignment, not capture. This is not disengagement from thought, but epistemic humility, a recognition of how knowing actually works. The argument we have followed is simple, but far-reaching. Some truths disappear under direct attention, not because they are hidden, but because attention alters their structure. When awareness tries to turn itself into an object, it creates distortion. Ibn Arabi offers a rigorous model of indirect knowing, where presence replaces inspection and alignment replaces control. This model has clear relevance for mental health, identity, stability, and reducing cognitive friction in modern life. The final insight is precise. The secret is not elsewhere. It is what remains when the need to look collapses. Understanding deepens not when awareness tightens its grip, but when it stops interfering with itself. That, for Ibn Arabi, is not mysticism, it is accurate cognition.